public speaking and presenting research. So we will welcome Lee and look forward to the information that we're about to hear this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Got some slides to go along. Can y'all see? Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, well, hi. Today, I heard you guys are going to the undergraduate symposium. You just got back from a conference, and it sounds like you're going to another conference soon. So I wanted to kind of hone our discussion today on public speaking, but not just public speaking in general, but focusing on presentation style and presentational design, and how we present our research to all audiences, right? So okay, hold on. Okay, cool. Like Dr. Brown said, I am Lee Schwab. I'm the assistant director of the forensics team on campus. I don't know if anyone's heard of the forensics team, but we are kind of a big deal. We've been a big organization on EMU's campus for many, many years. We've done really well in the past. We have had numerous national champions in all kinds of different public speaking categories. But in the last few years, we've done really well. We've placed in the top 3 in the nation. We go around the country at other colleges and universities and compete in public speaking for fun and just, the competition of it. Many different events, whether it be persuasion, informative speaking, or poetry. All of those elements, we work on our oral speaking and advocacy and critical thinking skills in organization and writing. So if that is of interest to you, please let me know or send me an email. We have a big presence on this campus and we have a lot of fun, I think. So if that's of interest to you after this talk, if you actually really like public speaking, please let me know. But first, that's a little bit about me. I also teach other comm courses on this campus. I teach Comm 124, which is the basic public speaking class, and I teach Comm in the LGBTQ community, which is offered every other year as an elective for the diversity, I believe, requirement for your degree. So please let me know if you're interested in that class at all as well. But yeah, just let me know a little bit about who you are all and maybe just give me your name and if you like public speaking or have any experience public speaking. Does anyone want to start for us?
I can go. My name is Michaela Johnson. I'm a junior. I have not done public speaking. I only public speak when I'm told to public speak to some extent.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't identify as a public speaker.
Good.
But that's it.
I can go next. My name is Smia. I'm a 4th-year psych major. And I'm kind of in the same boat as Michaela. I've really only done public speaking mostly like for classes and stuff, but I've been trying to do it more.
Awesome. And are you two presenting next week at the symposium?
Yeah, I will be.
Cool. All right.
I can go next. I'm Allie. I'm a senior anthropology major, and I have some experience, mostly like class experience with public speaking. I did like theater, so there was some like performance there, which I'm more comfortable performing than just regular speaking, I think.
For sure. I totally get that.
Yeah.
And to move this along, I'll just call out a name so we can move on. Erica, you want to go next? I see you're unmuted already.
My name is Erica. I'm not the best with public speaking. I do a lot of filler words like and which I really hate. right there. But yeah, I'm not the best with speaking. I normally just I avoid it in like classroom settings as well. So that's it. Just a lot of and likes.
It's very common. Everybody does it. Are you presenting at the symposium?
No, I'm getting farther into my research and kind of forming it. So we're moving that along, but not just yet, but I feel like it's gonna happen soon.
Okay, cool. All right. Who's
All
next?
right. Haley.
Hi, my name is Haley Johnson, and I'm a junior. I do have experience with public speaking, but I don't like it very much.
Okay.
Also very common.
I was going to say that it's probably more common.
Oh yeah.
Raymond.
Hey, can you? Oh, the camera's shit. Oh, okay. Sorry. My name is Raman Arib. I'm a public health major. Let's see. I'm not presenting at this symposium because I'm still in the process of actually collecting my data. Still waiting for the last couple of surveys to get back to me. I have had experience in public speaking, and I love presenting at every opportunity I can. At first, I used to hate it, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Attention's
Okay.
interesting.
Okay, Jamie.
Jamie texted me and said they're running to the bathroom, so if you called on them to tell them.
Well, Trinity, you can go.
Okay, I'm Trinity. I do have experience public speaking at conferences. I don't really like it that much, but I do better when I'm actually up there than I think I'm going to do. So that's my favorite part. And I have 3 undergraduate symposium presentations next week.
Wow. I didn't know you could do more than one at once. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's all right.
Mohammed.
Hello, my name is Mohammed Al Musawi. I'm a health administration. I'm a health admin seeking health administration bachelor's program. I'm a senior. I'm not scared of public speaking, but I feel like I need more preparation for it. I haven't done it in a while, so I don't think I'll be performing my speech in the symposium next weekend.
Got it.
And then Loani Ray.
My name is Lonnie Reha, and social work major. I used to do debate, and I really liked public speaking up until this last conference where I choked. Has never happened to me before. And my mentor and I withdrew from this symposium. I have no idea what's going on with me. Prior to that event, I always did great at public speaking, so maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Did Jamie make it back? If not, we'll move forward. I think I got everybody.
Okay, great. Awesome. So that gives me a little bit of a sense who you all are and where your public speaking kind of competency kind of resides right now. And it seems like we have a mixed batch, but it's very common that we know that public speaking is an important skill to have, whether it be in any arena, whether it be in our research or academically, our future careers, our activism and civic engagement throughout the world, or just the fun of it. Some of us do kind of like public speaking for just the attention or the artistic pursuit. That's some of us on the team, and that's some of us who do theater. All of that, whatever it may be, communication skills are important to hone for all aspects of our life, even if we kind of dread it a little bit. But it's very common. Today, I want to talk about some public speaking tips and presenting our research. And then I want to have some time for discussion, any questions you may have as it pertains to going into conferences. It sounds like a lot of you are on track to go to graduate school. So it's just more conferences in grad school. So whether you love conferences or you hate them, it's kind of a part of academic life, um, which is its own beast. But we'll talk about it as we go. So, as you've all kind of hinted at, we all suffer a little bit or from varying degrees from public speaking anxiety. And that is extremely common. And I usually like to make sure my students know that going into this because it, I think, gives a little bit of the burden off of us, knowing that everyone suffers from public speaking anxiety. We all have apprehension when it comes to public speaking. Unlike all creatures on this earth, we are social creatures and we have this thing called reputation, and we worry about perception, how others perceive us. That's unique to us. No other animals feel that pressure like we do. But the way that that pressure manifests is a very real anxiety. It manifests just like any other fear we have and any other fear other animals have. And when we're scared, we have that same fight or flight system, right? Adrenaline shoots through our body. We can't help it. Even though we are not being hunted by a wild animal, our bodies, our brains at an instinctual level can't tell the difference between being hunted by a wild animal or being scared that everyone thinks we are incompetent, right? And worried about our reputation. So I think that can give you a sense of relief knowing that it's not our fault, right? It is literally in our DNA to have this fear response, an anxious response. And it is so prevalent throughout our society across cultures that we fear public speaking that it has become a common joke, even though it is embedded in truth. There was actually a study done in the 90s, or a survey done, that more people said that they were more scared of public speaking than death. They ranked death as number two. And so that kind of has gone through communication circles as a bit of a joke, but it is true. It is true that some people at a funeral would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, is how people have circulated that in communication circles. There are some people that fear public speaking more than death. So I hope that gives you a little relief knowing that it is not just you. It is such a common fear. Everyone has it. We all dread it. We all worry about how we're perceived, and that is normal. And so knowing that it is a common experience, having that perspective, and also that it is embedded in our DNA, that we can, not get rid of our fight or flight response, but we can adapt to it, right? So we can kind of have that perspective, have that knowing, and utilize different strategies to help put us in a place that is ready to present, ready to prepare. And a lot of that comes with preparing, right? So I always have students in my class that are like, well, what if I wait till the last minute? And I always tell them, well, you're going to really struggle. You have to, it's not something you can just fake, right? You have to put in the work in order to feel ready to present. The more you prepare, the more your anxiety will go down, right? So preparing, making sure that you have done the work, done your research, organized your content, made sure you have a clear in your mind picture of your organizational pattern. I always tell my students, know your content and know your organization so that you can just kind of go in your brain. I know what I'm doing first. And if you have just a little thing in your mind that's like, this is my main point one, main point two, main point three, even if you forget some of the pieces in main point one, main point two, main point three, you still have it in that order in your brain memorized, right? Even if you don't have it perfect. The other thing is making sure we practice a lot, right? Practicing a lot is helpful, and making sure we practice in an environment that reflects where we're going to be speaking. I have students who say they practice, and I said, okay, what does your practice look like? And they were like, well, I ran it in my head a few times. And I say, that's not effective practicing, right? So if you're not speaking it out loud, if you're just running through it in your head, of course you're going to trip up or stumble through what you're talking about because you haven't spoken it out loud before, right? You have to work on that muscle memory. So making sure we practice in that way and practice in a way that is conducive to what our presentation will actually look and feel like, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And then finally, you want to make sure you're visualizing success, right? Some people have that old adage that's like, oh, picture the audience in their underwear, which is not helpful. It actually is more damaging to a lot of people's anxiety to imagine their audience in their underwear. It's not helpful. It's distracting, right? It's not an effective strategy. Instead, you want to visualize yourself doing well, right? You want to visualize yourself being successful and having a positive attitude, right? The more you dread it, the more you are telling yourself that it's going to be bad and you're going to mess up, the more likely that is going to happen, right? I know it's easier said than done, but the more you try and visualize success, maybe you have some affirmations you can give yourself and work on your breathing, you can adapt to it, right? So a lot of our fight or flight response means that our heart rate goes up. Adrenaline shoots through us and our heart rate goes up because we got to run, fight to the death or flee, right? And so how we combat that is taking our own space to make sure we get our breathing back to normal, right? Lowering our heart rate. And a lot of that can look like just a few simple breath exercises before you go up to speak. I always do it in my class. We do warm-ups, making sure we can kind of get our heart rate back to a normal pace. And it can look like, you know, the four corners breathing. So breathing in for 4, holding for 4, and exhaling slowly for 4 through your teeth, right? So slowly. So breathing in and right? So making sure you do that a few times, and that can kind of, you know, manually lower your heart rate itself, right? So making sure we adapt to our fear, and then we can overcome it, right? So keeping in mind that all of us suffer from public speaking anxiety, and the ways we can overcome it can help us have successful presentation styles and presentations for all walks of life. So how, now when we get into the content of our speech and public speaking, a lot of our anxiety goes away when we do the work to make sure we feel good about the content we're sharing. We feel good about our organization and the choices we made in our, you know, our writing style, all of that. So how do we grab our audience's attention? Any ideas? How do you grab your audience's attention when you write a paper?
I would say with energy, enthusiasm grabs my attention.
Yeah.
I love when people wake me up. I
Yeah.
don't know, this grabs my attention. Excitement about what you're presenting, or depending on situation. I love enthusiasm.
Definitely. Definitely. No one's going to want to listen to you if you start like seeming like you don't want to be there, right? So attention grabbing has to do a lot with our delivery, right? But what about what we actually say? What about our content? How do you start a paper? You start it with a hook, right? A hook. So in public speaking, we think of this as a hook or attention grabbing device. We try and pique our audience's interest without just being like, hi, my name is blah, 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 blah. Pique their audience interest with getting into what you're talking about, right? So the best way to do this, all communication scholars know and talk about the power of stories. We are storytelling creatures. We are drawn to stories. We utilize stories in all walks of life. It's how we, you know, keep our histories. It's how we promote change, all of it, right? Stories grab us, right? It piques our emotions. It pulls us in. The other ways you can kind of hook your audience, you can ask them a question. You can do other audience engagement, like telling a joke or asking them about themselves. Or you can share a shocking statistic, maybe a quote from a famous person to pull them in and pique their interest. But the best possible way to hook your audience is to start with a story. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but mostly because we remember stories way more than just numbers or just a simple fact by itself, right? Statistics are hard for our audience to retain after a long period of time, but the power of a story will stick with them long after because, it pulls on their emotions, it pulls on their senses, right? So it makes them feel something. And we remember feeling so much. So a Stanford professor did a study where he had to have all of his students create a speech and then tested the audience's memory on what they could remember. And he found that 63% of those tested remembered the stories in the speech, but only 5% could remember a single statistic from the speech. So numbers are very hard for our audiences to remember unless you pair them with a story, right? Or put them into perspective, right? So sometimes that looks like an analogy, right? So maybe you have an analogy like, I don't know if this is true. I'm just literally making this up. But drunk driving kills 15,000 people every year. That's like the entire population of EMU's campus, staff, faculty, and students gone in 1 year, right? So sometimes using numbers in a way that's making a comparison to put into your perspective, to put into your audience perspective, the size and scope of that number, right? Because to us, sometimes hearing a big number, or we can't really conceptualize how much that is. So sometimes helping us understand by, putting that number into perspective with maybe an image or a story or an analogy can be helpful, right? And it's just as simple as maybe reframing how you're giving your audience data, right? So embedding it into a story or introducing it with a story can be more helpful, right? So instead of in 2023, Ypsilanti, Michigan saw a 15% increase in community garden participation, just dropping that way, maybe you can embed it in more of a story or storytelling format. So remember last summer in Ypsilanti, we were all so busy, but then we saw this amazing thing, a vibrant community garden blossoming with fresh produce. And it turned out that in 2023, participants in these gardens grew by a remarkable 15%, right? So it's sometimes just as simple as incorporating some vivid language, personalizing the context for your audience can help them remember these things a little bit better, right? So starting off your speech, whether you're presenting your research or any other speech, maybe tell a story from your life. How did you get to your research, right? What drew you to it? What thing happened that made you think, maybe I should research this? Something like that can be really personable to your audience and help them just be more engaged with what you're going to talk about, right? Sometimes when we're talking about our data and our research, if your audience isn't really an expert in your field, things can get lost. So how can we make it accessible to them? The other thing I want to remind you of is when we're practicing, practice doesn't make perfect. We'll never always be perfect. We can't perfectly predict this situation or context that we're giving our speech in. Something could go awry, right? But practice makes permanent. And I tell this to my students, I tell this to students on the team all the time. Practice makes permanent. So how you practice is shaping the performance you will give, right? So if you're sitting in a chair going through it in your head, that's not going to be conducive to a good presentation. You need to be practicing in an environment that reflects the environment that you will present in, right? So the symposium happens in the student center. Sometimes there are other people giving presentations around you, right? So it's probably not effective to give your speech in a room by yourself to no one, right? It's not effective to practice in that way. You want to practice in a way that you are prepared for what could happen in the actual room. I always tell my students, if you are really nervous, if it will help you to, practice, these classrooms are empty sometimes throughout the day. Just come by, pop into a classroom, run your speech. That way it feels like you're doing it in the space that you will be giving the speech. It removes some of that anxiety of the fear of what it will look like, right? It helps you visualize the actual moment. So it'll help you reduce your apprehension. So making sure you're speaking out loud, you're practicing for an audience, practicing maybe in a little bit of a chaotic environment when other things are going on that could distract you, especially if you're giving your poster presentation or whatever presentation where other people are presenting in other areas of the room, right? Always helpful in that way. So what I want you to remember with public speaking is the anxiety is so normal. Everyone has it. We all struggle from it all the time. And then finally, I want you to think about starting with a story, making your speech vivid for your audience so that they can hook into it much easier. And then finally, practice, practice, practice. I tell students all the time, your anxiety goes down the more you are exposed to something, right? It's like exposure to a fear makes it simpler. I tell my students all the time, I don't like flying. I hate flying. But something I've heard about and, in my research about public speaking, but also my research about being scared of flying is the more you expose yourself to your fear, the less scary it becomes, right? So I always volunteer to drive my friends to the airport, right? So the more I'm used to being at the airport or near the airport, seeing planes take off and land safely, the more it reduces my fear, right? And for public speaking, that looks like anytime you have an opportunity to speak in front of people, just take it, right? The more low stakes times you do it, the easier it becomes. Raise your hand in class. All of those things can help you reduce your fear. Does anybody really not enjoy making phone calls to book appointments or doing anything where you have to talk to a customer service person? Yeah, I have a lot of students that tell me they hate making phone calls like that all the time. The more you do it, the easier it becomes, right? All right, so let's focus a little bit more about presenting research. So some of you have presented research before. Some of you, maybe this is your first time. Presenting research is amazing. It's one of the funnest things we get to do in academic life, whether you are a grad student or undergrad, or maybe one day a professor. I think presenting research is really magical because sharing your research is as important as doing the research itself, right? We talk about this idea in academia of the research being in the ivory tower, right? And being behind a paywall or something, right? Research is important because you are discovering new things. You are opening the world to new ideas. And so don't let it live in the ivory tower. Share it, put it in the world, tell other colleagues about it, share it with other students, right? Spread your message and share what you learn, right? Don't let it live in a box. So your research is important. You have important things to say. So let's put them out there, right? And part of that is, giving presentations on them, not just the writing, right? So let's talk about some challenges with that. So typically when I talk to students about informative speaking, whenever we're trying to inform an audience, we have some things we sometimes struggle with. And typically that comes from we are sharing with people that may not have the knowledge that we have, right? They may not have the years of research, the years of experience that we have. So we have to really put it into perspective when we're deciding what to include in our speeches, in our presentations, what our audiences might already know, and what do they need to know, right? What is the big takeaway? What can they learn from us? Don't overestimate their knowledge level in terms of what they're coming to your presentation already knowing, or what they have no idea of, right? So trying to do that audience analysis, thinking about what your audience may, already know and what they might not. And that sometimes is very hard. You can't really know exactly who your audience will be, but making sure you can explain your research to a regular person who may not be an expert in your field, right? So making sure they are able to understand and follow along. Sometimes you have to use terms that aren't as specific to your field, right? So avoid some of the jargon that an everyday audience might not understand, or explain it to them. You might have to define some of your terms more, right? So consider that as you go in your preparation, and honestly, while you're speaking. Your audience could very easily show that they're confused, and maybe you have to kind of backtrack a little bit to give a little more context. The other thing here is we want to make sure we are giving our audience the rationale, right? We have to make sure our audiences know why our research is significant, and we have to let them know upfront, because all of us are egocentric beings, right? We hear the phrase, the colloquialism, time is money, right? To our audiences, they want to know why we are speaking, and they want to know as soon as we open our mouth, right? Because they want to know how this applies to them, what they can learn from it, right? So we have to make sure in our introduction we address that rationale, and make sure it's clear to our audience, right? So these are some of the challenges we face with informative speaking. Now I want to talk a little bit more about how we make that accessible to our audiences, right? So whether your research is for whoever it's intended for, whoever may, sometimes we read research and it has future directions, right? Or future implications. Maybe it's for your colleagues. Maybe it can be applied somewhere in the real world, making sure we have a way to connect with them, whatever background they may come from, right? So making sure we can put it into words that they understand, making sure that our rationales are clear, and meeting our audience halfway, right? Giving them a reason to care, right? And doing that in the beginning. All right, so talking about content, we want to make sure we consider our organization and remember the bigger picture, right? I don't know, do you guys have a time limit for the undergrad symposium when you're presenting? I know that some people can present, there's the poster presentations, and does anyone know anything about that? I'm just curious.
Usually at most conferences, they may give them like a 15-minute time slot where the first 12 minutes is presenting orally and the last
Got it.
3 maybe for questions, some
Yeah.
variation of that. And then posters is usually maybe an hour and a half, hour 45-minute time block
Yeah,
where they kind of, meet those that come up to their posters and may question them or ask them to explain their research.
right. Okay, cool. Right, so it's very important to think about which medium you're presenting as. One of the biggest and most important ways we prepare is knowing the context of where and, where we're presenting at, right? So what time slots they give you, will there be time for questions? How many people typically are in the room coming to ask you questions? So you really have to think about your time management skills, right? And that is very different if you are just doing the poster presentation and people come up to you at random and there's not really a set time limit versus the conference typical presentation where you get a 15-minute block and half the time you're presenting or half the time you're answering questions. Whatever their time allocation is, you want to make sure you are very clear on their expectations of you, right? And then you would prepare based on those guidelines. So the big thing we want to do and make sure we don't do at conferences is just reading our papers, right? It's not helpful. They can read your paper later when you have it published, but you want to be able to give them the big picture of what you're talking about and the key highlights, and allocating time accordingly, right? You don't have time to typically how you structure your paper, whatever sections you have based on what kind of research you're doing, that should inform how you condense your time. So what does that look like? Based on what kind of research you're doing, whether you're doing qualitative, quantitative, or maybe even autoethnography, anything, right? You have a certain type of organization with the frame of your paper. The main thing I'll tell you is the abstract you submitted for the undergrad symposium or whatever conference, you don't need the abstract, right? The abstract is already the summary or the tiny piece of your paper, right? That would be the tiny pitch that you give in an elevator of your paper, right? The abstract. You have a little bit more at a conference presentation, 15 minutes. The biggest mistake people make when they're presenting their research is they spend too much time on their background and literature review. It happens a lot. They start and then they keep going and they keep going, they keep going, and they realize they've spent 10 minutes just giving the background, right? And the background in your literature review isn't really your ideas, right? It's you gathering the literature that's out there that helps inform your research, but it's not the new stuff that you are presenting. So we really want to make sure we don't accidentally spend too much time giving that context, because it's not really why we're here, right? We're here to hear about your work and what you discovered, right? So don't accidentally spend too much time talking about what is in your field that's already been said, right? You give that context and then you dive into what you discovered, right? We are here to hear about your research and everything you are learning and the new ideas you may bring to the table. Don't get bogged down talking about what's already been discovered, right? So that's a common mistake. So if you're thinking about what is the most important part of your research to present upon, is really this area of the results, discussion, and conclusion, right? Whatever you may kind of title those parts of your paper. But we are most interested in, obviously, what you found out, right? And what that might tell us, right? So one of the things you may want to do is get whatever time requirements from wherever you're presenting, whether you have 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, and try and allocate and organize your presentation around that concept, right? So like maybe giving most of your time to the results, discussion, and conclusion. If you have 12 minutes to present, maybe you're doing 8 minutes on the second half and just 4 minutes on the intro, background, literature, and your methods and materials, maybe something like that. It's up to your own discretion, but you definitely want to focus your time more so on what you discovered, right? So give them what they need to know, right? Put it into context, and then really spend most of your time on your study, your research, and what you found out, right? And we've kind of already touched on this, but the biggest thing in terms of delivery is don't worry about maybe giving into some vocal filler like an right? That's very common. A lot of us do it. Don't get bogged down in critiquing yourself in that way, but just being passionate to share your ideas, being more willing to converse with people, right? Especially in the poster presentation when people come up and, they may pass by, and being open to talking to people, making sure you care and you're clearly invested in what you're talking about, right? Making sure you seem enthused, you seem excited to share, right? Why would your audience want to listen to you if you don't seem interested in what you're talking about, right? Why should they care if it doesn't seem like you don't care, right? So share your passion, show your enthusiasm. All of this is worth sharing, right? Your idea was born out of your curiosity, right? Your research came from something that excited you. So pique your audience's curiosity, help them get excited. And what that looks like usually is, right, open body language, making sure you're not closed off, just like staring at the wall and not facing people, right? Making sure you're standing by your poster, you're proud of your work, um, and your feet are facing whoever you're talking to, right? It's always important to remember where your feet are. That's kind of a cheat sheet to knowing if you seem like you're open to talk to people, right? If your feet aren't facing them, it kind of signals your body language is closed off and you don't really want to be there, right? So when we think about presenting research, our takeaways have to do with meeting your audience halfway, simplifying some of the concepts in your speech so they are accessible to your audience, making sure you're reducing the level of jargon that you may have in the actual paper so that people from other fields and areas can understand your messaging, and making sure you identify your big idea, right? So what is the big takeaway? Why are we here? What is the thing that you learned from your research, right? And framing it kind of from there, right? Inward out. And finally, making sure we're having fun and we seem excited to share, making sure we clearly show that we care about our research and therefore our audiences will care as well, right? So that's kind of a little bit from my end. I'm curious what questions you have. I'm curious how you're thinking about presenting your research, whether you're doing the big oral presentation or the poster presentation. Maybe any difficulties you've had at conferences before, and we can talk about those.
Okay, feel free to unmute if you guys have any questions or any thoughts on what Lee has presented. It was a great presentation. It was a lot of great information that I even found was really nice. And so does anyone have anything to respond to Lee's prompt? We got some presenters next week. Any helpful information as you begin to prepare your presentations?
Yeah, does anyone have any specific questions about maybe your presentation? I don't know if anybody has, I didn't really cover presentational design with like slides. I don't know if you've been to conferences that allow you to have slides. I have a lot to say about that as well, if anyone has any questions.
I have a question about like making scripts. Do people do that for like oral presentations often?
Yeah, so we talk about writing. There's like a lots of different kinds of speaking, right? So you can memorize, right? If you've done theater, you know what, memorizing looks like. But memorizing isn't always the most realistic approach. Memorizing can fall into a trap, right, of making our anxiety worse because we're trying to make sure we say the exact next word correctly. But when it comes to presenting our research, you've done the work. You've spent countless hours with your materials, your data, looking up stuff for your literature review. So you know your content. And the best thing you can do when you're presenting is making sure you feel knowledgeable and then having more of we call it, there's like a full sentence outline, which is like ideally in a perfect world what you would say, your script written out word for word. And then we have this idea of a key phrase outline. So that is where we take our full sentence, full script and reduce it to maybe the main points, maybe a specific piece that you want to cite correctly, or a certain statistic that you want to share. Typically, This looks like, practicing the full sentence outline, and after some time of practicing, you only need like the first word of a certain part, and it will clue you into what you were supposed to say, right? So typically, that's how, when I'm coaching people, I get them to start with their speech, start with, writing out ideally what you would want to say, and then maybe deleting a couple things as you go, as you get more familiar with your content. And eventually that looks like, right, we talk about going from the full script to a key phrase outline, which is probably still on paper. And then ideally you can get to a world where you are just using note cards. And so those have those special key pieces that clue you into what you are. But I always tell people some of the best things you can do is memorize your structure. Um, so even if you miss a few key things to talk about, you can always know where you are in your speech, right? So making sure you kind of memorize the structure of your paper, right? So if you're going to have a little bit of the intro, which is kind of the hook, maybe you tell a story of how you got into this, and then you give the context, like a little bit of the lit review. And then obviously you got to talk about where you come in. So then you talk about your materials and your methodology. Then you talk about what you found, and then you kind of wrap it up, right? So if you know the main, structure, you can kind of keep it in mind as you go. And hopefully you've rehearsed enough that you know like the actual content that you would say in those pieces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So when I don't present, I did a couple conferences when I was in grad school. I don't present research all that often anymore. But I help people with their speeches. Um, and so I've coached a couple people on, and done myself, like a wedding toast. I don't know if anybody's ever done that. But uh, when I did it for my wedding toast, I wrote out what I wanted to say at my sister's wedding. Um, And then basically, anytime a paragraph started, I just needed the first couple words. After I'd practiced it enough that I just needed the first couple words, and then I could go, right? To clue me in. And then eventually I didn't need anything. And that's how I've kind of coached a couple people with speeches like that as well, right? So knowing kind of the first line of each paragraph that you've written out, once you've practiced enough, you can kind of vamp, and you don't necessarily have to say it word for word the same each time. So you're not necessarily memorizing, it's more conversational. Um, but you are memorizing the structure, right?
Gotcha.
I have a question. You kind of answered my second one. What is like a healthy balance between looking at your information and presenting it? Because I have a hard time not only trying to remember the information, but then I'll start panicking and I'll kind of forget everything. And then I'll just start umming and liking the whole audience to death. But you kind of answered that one already. But what is the best way to present mixed information, like qualitative and quantitative? Like, what is the best way to kind of get that information across? Because minds is required to kind of analyze both of them. So, what would be a good way to present that?
Yeah. So is it a study that uses both kind of methodologies?
It
Is it
does,
a study?
because I'm kind of analyzing what ways does nutrition and education, how is it affected by impoverished situations, like impoverished family situations or dynamics in Flint, Michigan. So a portion of it is going to be quantitative, but it's also going to be qualitative as well. So I don't know how to kind of put them in there.
Yeah, that sounds like a really awesome study. Um, I would definitely probably approach it. It's all one paper, it's all one study, kind of that structure we talked about, where you get to materials or methodology used, and you could kind of talk about your quantitative version first, and then talk about qualitative as well. I think typically um, quantitative is sometimes a little bit harder to explain. So making sure you're giving a little bit more time to explain, you know, what your subjects were and how you conducted and collected your data. Um, making sure you spend a little bit more time with that part of it. Whereas
Okay.
your qualitative, you just explain maybe who you interviewed or how you gathered the material. Sometimes, I don't know if did you do interviews?
I am just kind of collecting my data. So right now I'm kind of doing like a lit review, but there's
Got it.
mixed. Like a
Yeah.
lot of the articles that I'm finding, they're mixed.
Okay.
Like mixed format. Some of them are qualitative and some of them are of quantitative, but they both have such rich information in both of them that I want to include them. But when I have to present my research from my lit reviews, I don't know how I'm going to present it.
Got it. Got it. Um, yeah, so I think sometimes when you're presenting qualitative and it's your own research, sometimes it's nice to like share something you found, like a quote from someone you interviewed or whatever it may be. If this is all stuff in your literature review, you want to keep it pretty succinct, right? Give them the context of here's kind of what's out there on this subject, here's what some experts say, here's the research that has been done already in regards to this topic. And mostly you're just kind of going over their results, right? Like just kind of giving them a quick preview of like what other things have been found in regards to this that could inform what you are trying to find, whether that be, how impoverished contexts intersect with nutritional needs or whatever. Maybe in other places outside that aren't necessarily the specific context of Flint, Michigan, right? So like just giving them a little bit of context into the research that you found, but don't spend your entire speech on the literature review for sure. You want to talk about what you found most primarily, if that makes sense. But I would just approach it with that similar structure. And when you get to methodologies, go through quantitative first and then kind of go through qualitative after that. And then when you get to the results, kind of do the same thing.
Oh.
Yeah, that study sounds super awesome.
Any other questions, you guys? And so I have a couple of questions. So I know Erica mentioned earlier about filler words.
Yeah.
And so how do you best strategize not using those? I mean, is it that the more that you practice that they'll tend to go away? Or do you suggest when you feel as if you're going to say one, just pause? Like, what do you actually like practical things to do when you want to use these words?
Yeah. So if you'll notice, I included them sometimes when I speak as well. It is extremely common. And I think the field of communication studies has grown more accepting of the fact that it is in our common language. It is used by everyday people. And when we think about early communication studies, there was this idea of elocutionists, where you talked about this idea of etiquette as well. You're doing an etiquette presentation. People have really strict views of speaking and what it means to speak well, right? And communication studies as a field has kind of reconciled with the idea that it can be unrealistic to have those expectations of speakers and can be, what's the word? It mostly can be unrealistic, and the word I'm kind of thinking of is gatekeeping, because just because someone speaks a certain way and maybe has more fillers doesn't necessarily mean they have lower intelligence than someone who can avoid these filler words more in their daily speaking, right? So I think the communication studies field has gotten a little bit more leeway with that, right? But previously, yes, it is very common to recommend pausing more if you feel yourself doing it. Most of the time, we implement these vocal fillers because we don't know what we're saying next, or we're having trouble forming our thought, but we are scared to pause. We are scared of silence, right? Because we think silence communicates like we don't know what we're talking about. But the uhs and ums aren't, they're just kind of putting a spotlight on that, right? So silence actually is more, pausing and silence and taking your time actually communicates more thoughtfulness rather than thinking your audience is perceiving you as confused or forgetful, rather than, you know, when you pause, they're actually just like waiting for you to speak again. But it's actually more, I guess, damaging to your credibility to say the uhs and the ums versus just pausing. So yes, they do recommend pausing more, but mostly people have gotten a little more accepting of, we say uhs and ums, right? It happens.
Okay. And what would you say would be like the ideal time frame? So of course, symposium next week, like how far in advance really should you start preparing and practicing for your speech?
Yeah, so when we think about really great public speakers, Steve Jobs would prepare epic speeches weeks in advance, right? I kind of take into consideration the time frame, like how long am I expected to speak, and because of that, on the way there, and I practiced it. I had a quite a long layover, and I practiced it for probably a total of um, 4 hours altogether,
Mhm.
and I was ready to go, right? So if you think about it in regards to your skill level, I would say a 15, 20-minute speech, trying to at least start getting up and speaking, practicing, maybe 2 weeks in advance if you can. Obviously, I always tell my public speaking students, I know people wait to the last minute. Some people work better that way. It's very, common, right? Some people work that way. They write their speech the night before for a public speaking class, and then they go in there. And so we all know people wait to the last minute, but I always say the further out you can start practicing, the better, especially if you know you have a lot of public speaking anxiety. The more you can practice, the more you can practice in front of people, the better.
I appreciate that. So for those that are speaking at symposium next week, presenting research, Trinity, Samia, Jamie, do you guys have any questions specifically as it relates to your upcoming presentations?
I don't personally have any questions. I feel like a lot of what I did have questions about was answered, so I'm feeling pretty optimistic.
Okay. And are you
I
doing
don't
a
have any
poster
either.
or an oral?
I'm doing a poster, which I've done one before as second author, so I feel like I've had like a little bit of prep.
Okay, okay. And Trinity, sorry for interrupting.
No, you're fine. I was just saying I don't have any questions either.
Okay, and you're doing 3 oral presentations?
Correct.
Are you using note cards, Trinity, or how are you actually prepping yourself?
So I'm probably going to do what I did in Maryland. And what I did was I wrote down everything I was going to say. So it gave me it was kind of me practicing what I was going to say. But I didn't write it down in the fact of this is exactly what I was going to say. It's a general basis. I want to hit all these points.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Okay,
put it into sentences just in case I just go blank. But I have stuff that I can add on to it. But what I did was instead of using said, like what I wrote down, I had it on a Google Doc on my iPad.
Okay,
So I
okay,
could just simply go through it and I could see on my iPad which slide I'm on and what I want to say for each slide. So that's just kind of how I organize it in my brain.
okay, okay. That
That
sounds
sounds
good.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jamie, did you have any questions? Okay. Well, if there are no final questions, then we want to thank Lee for being with us today. Thank you for the information. And as a matter of fact, I know you mentioned actually developing PowerPoint presentations. If you wouldn't mind, could you share that with me? And maybe that's something I can pass along to the students.
Oh, so I typically, in terms of like effective PowerPoint presentations,
Yeah.
I have a resource where I have my own slides, but I could send a video that I find very helpful.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's just a TED Talk.
Yeah, we'll address that in our next class, which is on the 4th. We'll talk about actually creating the PowerPoint presentations. And so I think that'll be greatly helpful for them in doing that.
Okay,
Awesome.
cool.
So you guys hang on for a moment. We want to thank Lee for being here. We appreciate you.
Yeah, of course.
And if there's any questions, can they reach out to you directly?
Yeah, of course. You have my email. Feel free to share that. Happy to help. Happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, everybody. Best of luck with your presentations.
Awesome. Absolutely. And I'll start